Economist Intelligence Unit, joins me now live from London. Thanks for having you on the programme, Megan. Dear me, I'm getting all my words tied up with so much going on in Athens. Megan, you've been watching events, certainly what's been going on in the Greek Parliament. How much will European banks, leaders, politicians be breathing a sigh of relief over what's happened in Athens this evening?
Not a whole lot. I mean, tonight's vote was crucial, but it's not sufficient to breathe a sigh of relief. You know, as mentioned, a big test will come a week from today when the medium-term plan is put to Parliament. And if that's passed, then there will be about 3 days when Parliament will discuss implementing the legislation. And if that's passed on July 1st at the earliest, then hopefully the Troika can get together and agree a second bailout for Greece on July 3rd. So there aren't that many days in there for wiggle room or for disagreement in the Greek Parliament. What's more, as you mentioned, the voting tonight happened mostly along party lines, which means there's no consensus for this government and there's no consensus for this medium-term plan. And so even if the medium-term plan is actually passed, and I expect it will be impossible to implement without any consensus and without the agreement of the opposition parties. The Prime Minister has reshuffled his cabinet, and so he's bought a bit more time, but that doesn't fundamentally change the fact that not only are a number of senior party members within the ruling PASOK party, but also the public are completely against these austerity measures.
I mean, for many of our viewers who won't be economist experts, words like default and contagion have been used a great deal by contributors talking about what's going on in Greece at the moment. Why would default in payments, in Greek paying back the money that it owes, be a real problem had the government failed in the confidence vote, and if they do not become successful in the vote in passing the austerity measures next week?
Well, Greece right now is running a primary deficit, which means that if you don't consider the interest costs that it's paying on its debt, it needs to borrow just to run the government. And so if Greece were to default on its debt, it would inevitably lose access to funding from the EU and the IMF. And it would find itself in a position where it would need money immediately just to run the government, but wouldn't be able to borrow any because it would be completely frozen out of the markets and cut off from official sources. And so Greece would probably have to leave the Eurozone in order to devalue its currency. The alternative being to just stop paying any of its public sector workers, which is just a recipe for civil unrest. So if Greece were to be forced to default now with a primary deficit, it would probably have to leave the Eurozone.
We'll see what does happen, certainly in the next week. For the moment, Megan Greene, thank you. Let's cross back now.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, you saw what Syntagma Square looks like tonight on the night of the vote of confidence. I shudder to think of what it will look like a week from tonight when the Parliament is discussing the medium-term plan. And even if the medium-term plan is passed, and it's not necessarily a given that it will be, I think it probably will. But if it's passed, it will be extremely difficult for the government to implement it without any kind of consensus or support from the opposition. And on top of that, even if the government did implement all of the terms of the medium-term plan, I don't think this would restore Greece to solvency. And so if Greece does return it does pass this medium-term plan and does get a second bailout, there's still a number of questions left hanging about how Greece can return to some sort of sustainable debt level. That's right, and actually, you know, this past week we saw Ireland start to push back on the Troika as well and say that they're now considering burning some of the senior bondholders in Ireland. So we are starting to see some of the other countries push back on the Troika because Plan A that the Troika's come up with, which is to just provide bailouts for these countries and provide sort of high-interest loans that kick the can further down the road, really isn't working. And so the more that that becomes apparent, the more that the other countries start to agitate as well.